Perfect.
So, earlier, or last meeting, my Representative Dolan had asked, to see which, um, recommendations from the last, Committee on Commissions, recommendations were adopted and which ones weren't. And so we went back through and, just kind of broke down all of the recommendations from the previous ones and just, were able to update as much or see which ones were adopted or not. There are some unknown statuses at this time for some of them, but we are currently working to keep.
Let me interrupt you
Updating
for a
that.
second, just to bring Karen up to date. We were going through the volumes of things that you had recommended and had decided upon in the last iteration of this. And so we had some questions about, well, it says they're gonna do this. Did that happen? So that's what we asked Brad to go back and look at. So go ahead.
So that's basically it. We were able to see which ones were adopted in House Bill 1245 in 2020 and House Bill 1269 in 2022, and we went through and just by recommendation and see which ones were adopted in full, partially adopted. There are some which are were either not adopted or the status of those is unknown at this time, but we're still in the process of either confirming those or if at all possible, we're in the process of that.
Okay.
And I know it's also asked about the mapping for all the committees as well.
Right. Just as a reminder, what we had thought was one of our potential open actions going forward was to look at perhaps tasking our standing committees with overseeing or following up on a lot of these activities and seeing which ones, like if you're the chairman of committee X, Y, and Z, which commissions do you have oversight over, or could you have oversight over, depending on the subject matter? So what we looked is for our assistants to help us do some mapping. That these all map into this committee, and these all map into this committee, and these over here don't seem to map anywhere, and they're kind of out in the open. So that one of the tasks was to create that mapping for us. So we said, okay, for Leggy Admin, for example, we could say, you have, according to our mapping, you have 30 commissions that you are connected to. And one of the thoughts is that we need to rely on that committee chair person to provide some either supervision or direction or whatever we decide to come from that committee chairs. But first we need to know which committee chair has what. So, and that's to be completed probably within the next week or so.
I'm not sure on the timeline of that as of yet, because we're also working off the same list as Deborah Childs, as she's been working. She's also using that. She's also updating that list as well. So we don't want to make an additional list on top of that and kind
Sure.
of reinvent the wheel. Is kind of so I'm not sure on the timeline on that as of yet, but it's in process.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Brad, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's pretty much. I won't go through and read each thing because you have it in front of you. But it's kind of the current status of all the recommendations of the previous.
Great, thank you for doing that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, should we go through it a little bit though, so we know what we're talking about for the meeting? I mean, we got, like, for instance, the issue about guidance, I guess it's sort of what we're gonna be, that's on the bottom of page 2. That's sort of what we're gonna be working on, I think.
Right. So but no, I believe this came up in the previous meeting as well about the guidance for members as they're drafting these study committees.
Mhm.
again, as of right now, it does not appear that that has been adopted, but I'm not sure where along in that process that is at this point. I'd have to double check on that, but it would be kind of, but I believe that was discussed at the last
Well,
meeting. if I
we had
remember
talked
correctly.
about that if a study commission was to be enacted, that we talked about maybe creating a template for OLS, saying, "Hey, I'm Representative X, and I want to create a study committee or a commission, and here's the subject matter." We would be asking OLS to come back to them and say, here's a template. If you're gonna have a study commission, here's what needs to be in the framework of creating a study commission. So that's what we're talking about.
I believe that was discussed, but that, as of right now, that's not what has been adopted or anything, but that would be,
Right.
a-
I spoke with
committee.
the folks at OLS about that, and they said that's something they could certainly do, but it would have to be at our direction to do that. They wouldn't do that just because they think it's the right thing to do. It'd have to come from us. Karen, did you ever get down that path of that as well?
I don't, not that far. I mean, part of the problem is what happens in OLS is a little bit of, a policy that's set by a particular speaker's office. I mean, the other problem that we ran into, if you look at the dates of the reports that we did, we were really in the teeth of COVID, and things got a little bit sidelined along the way. But, I mean, with your forbearance, could I just like talk for 5 minutes?
Sure, go right ahead, please.
And I can just sort of go through things because I've been thinking a lot about this, and it does include a whole lot of intersecting pieces. So I think it's hard to know where exactly to start. But the first thing is that, and Deborah has worked really hard on this in HCS, is to know what the commissions are that we have that exist, right? So we have an Excel spreadsheet, and we know, and we're more and more, we have the list of commissions, we have the statutory authority that created them. In the Excel spreadsheet that we were working with, actually the House or Senate committee that had jurisdiction over the subject matter was listed in a column. So you may find, Brad, that some of that information is right there. We have the administrative agency that a particular commission is associated with listed. And then, you know, there's, when we were working on it, there's all kinds of information about how frequently they're meeting and that sort of thing to try to decide whether it's something that should go forward. So that has to be a document from which a lot of our actions occur, I think. And I was thinking about it, instead of us always trying to figure out whether a commission is really useful or not by tracking how many times they're meeting. I mean, I think in some respects, we should also try to get the administrative agency that they're associated with to take some responsibility for at least letting us know if they think that this has sort of run its course, or some of the people that are involved in it. So if you have that as a basic grounding document. And what was put in the statute the last time was to be sure that that is updated on an annual basis. I mean, I think HCS will be updating it all the time, but that's provided to all the committee chairs right from the get-go. So that when committee chairs open up their standing committee operations, they have something in front of them that they know. So when there are requests that are coming in, they have a basis to work on. And if you wanted to have somebody refine it down to just the statutory commissions that relate to a particular agency, you could do that too. So then the other thing I was thinking about, a lot of our issues start with somebody coming up with an idea to have a study committee or a commission and going into OLS, right? So I think that we should put together some sort of infrastructure to enable OLS to ask a few questions of these people and to sort of require that the people that are coming in with the request have done it. And one of the main things is to make sure that those people have done the research that they need to do to find out whether a commission or committee has already been established to study this subject. And it was pretty clear to me that Dave, the staff themselves at the time of the request doesn't have the time to go back and do the research themselves. So if we have this basic document, it shouldn't be that hard to do that research, especially if it's available on the website. So the other thing that I think we need to do and work with OLS, in what you were saying, is to come up with a template for study committees and commissions, things that will always be in there. And those things should be shared not only with members, but there should be a mutual understanding of what these things will include, including reporting requirements, repeal dates, and all that sort of thing. And I think one of the tasks of this committee could be what we think any well-structured commission or study committee should have in it, like clear reporting requirements, membership, clear direction of what they're going to study, all that sort of thing. And I think we could do everybody a good service if we kind of worked out a template because that's where a lot of these issues start, is right at OLS when people march in the door, right? The other issue that comes up is that members come in with ideas of who they want as members of these commissions, if they're statutory commissions, and they don't even reach out to find out whether like a certain entity even wants to participate. And sometimes they have the wrong name of the organization. And then if a bill passes that these things aren't corrected, it falls on House Committee Services to work all that stuff out. And that's, I think, part of what really drives them crazy. So, people always like to have BIA on their commissions. And then the BIA is like, we have to prioritize our lives too. And we can't be on 10 commissions.
Let me interject also. I'm hearing from the current speaker and the previous speaker that unfortunately our fellow members will campaign for a study commission, and then when it gets to the cusp of putting it in place and
And they
appointments,
don't want to be on.
they say, that's great, but don't put me on it. But
Right.
even when it was their idea to put the commission together, so I wonder if, as a group, we might put a rule, if you will, in effect that say, if you're an advocate for a study commission, you want it done, you gotta serve on it. And that might,
Well, and I think as part of our charge, we need to think of it. My thought is this, that we're going to set up some sort of infrastructure that people can always work off of. And one part of the infrastructure would be if a committee is assessing whether to create a study committee or a commission, have a conversation with the members of the committee at the time and see who's interested in actually working on it, right? But there are other things that could always be part of the analysis. Like you could provide this to a committee chair or to committees, like, is this a subject that is really timely? Is this something that a study committee can really handle? Is there somebody else that could be studying it or is studying it presently? I mean, I think there's a whole series of questions. If we write them down, we could provide them to committee chairs and they could use that as a way of informing whether a study committee could go forward.
right, and I don't mean to interrupt, so.
No, it's fine. I'm
There's-
sorry. I
there's
just
strain
have
of
all this
con-
stuff in my head
Well,
and
the
I just
strain
want
of
to get it
consciousness
out.
that I think we need to hear.
Right. So, I mean, actually somebody was asking me today whether a study committee should be formed, and that was what I was thinking about, all the things that could be asked. Because the other thing is that study committees do provide an unbelievably useful service, and you don't want to be like randomly snuffing them out just because you want to keep the numbers down. I mean, if it's a really important topic that should be studied, and it can be studied in the context of like a 6-week period, it can be really, really good.
But there was one, I serve on another committee that I serve on the EDNA committee. And one of the things that we ran into recently this past spring was a Bureau of Statistics type of commission said, well, we need to be studying how many of this kind of person is participating, how about this kind of person, and this, these types of statistics that we need. And it came to light that UNH is already doing that at a very detailed level. So why can't we just take advantage of the statistics that they're creating and not have to duplicate it with another study commission at the State House? So we decided to do that, and we killed the state
Well, and that's
commission.
the kind of thing, now that might not end up on our Excel, our master list, but that's the kind of research.
Right.
I mean, conversely, there are long-standing statutory commissions that have their own statutory responsibilities, and just because they're studying an overall topic that relates to a particular study committee, the legislature is suggesting you can't assume that just because the legislature wants it studied, that statutory commission is going to jump on the issue and just do it.
And we have,
So
and-
that's all part of it. But I really think as a committee here, we could do some really good work on like telling chairs or telling committees what they should be assessing when they're deciding if something should go forward, and making sure that the committees have the information on what already exists. And that's what had been missing like years ago.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Evil, one of the things that we've been talking about is how can we encourage standing committees to do some of the research themselves rather than creating a new committee? Would you imagine, as you're providing guidance, as we're providing guidance to all the committee chairs, that one of the things we're asking as well is this something that this committee could do either through a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee or something like that?
And I think there's a lot of people that want to encourage stuff like that. I think that's great if they'll do it. That's part of the chart. I mean, the other thing, we had an idea, in the committee of committees, that it actually would be leg admin that would meet on an ad hoc basis to review existing committee and commissions. But we tried to put that through rules and it got killed. And then the other thing that I think it was HB 1269, we tried to establish a committee on committees, not unlike this, but it would be done and so it would be a committee that would be reviewing everything that exists, like on a very structured, ongoing basis. Because the problem is, if nobody is reviewing what's been going on and what's created, 10 years can pass and all of a sudden there's so many things, everybody's head explodes and then they dig in again. And as part of the infrastructure maybe we can create here, we want to put together a system where these things are constantly updated and reviewed and assessed. But not by bringing every agency in every other year, because it takes them, forever to come in. It's just way too much work. Anyway, sorry to go on, but that's sort of my idea.
No, that's a good idea. We value that because of the experience you've had. We really appreciate that. Anyone else have some thoughts that they want to put on the table before we get continued? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to pick up on, actually, it was something that you brought up, which was, ED&A,
Mhm.
recognizing that UNH is already doing some of this work around demographics and statistics and
right.
things like that. I think the university system is could be a really incredible partner in doing some of this research, supporting study committees and commissions. At a commission that I chaired during my freshman term, we had students from Dartmouth College, their School of Public Policy, reach out to ask if they could be helpful and supportive, and they helped design a website, helped pull together a bunch of research for us, and I found it incredibly beneficial. I will say I'm biased as a graduate of the School of Public Policy at UNH, but know that they're always looking for projects to put students on that aren't just busy work, right? That could actually be relevant to, the future of the state. So, if it would be helpful to bring in folks from the Carsey School of Public Policy at UNH or political science departments at Plymouth or Keene, I think as a funding partner for the university system, I don't think we should hesitate to reach out and figure out if there are ways that we could partner in ways that are mutually beneficial.
Good. I just, I have, by the way, there's, now I'm gonna embarrass myself because I can't remember her last name. Is it, who is the, on EDNA, the Abenaki woman, Shelley?
Yeah, Representative Shelley Gould.
Shelley Gould.
Yep.
I talked to Shelley,
Sherry.
Sherry Gould. I talked to Sherry, and she was nervous that our activity was going to kill the commission on Native Americans, and she pleaded with me if I could please intervene. I said, "Don't worry about that. That's not what we're about to do." But there are issues like that some people are very wedded to, if I can use that term, and that find a lot of value in those commissions as standing commissions that probably should never go away because of the important work that they do. So I think as part of our activity, we ought to try to root those out, and build a fence around them, if you will, to make sure that they don't get swept up in some general cancellation activity that we might not want to see happen. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I at least it sounded like from last week, if we were talking about today some sort of template or flow chart or however imagining it, I would hope that wouldn't, if these are standing committees that are meeting and that are hitting milestones or goals that they've set out, or some way that they're able to check those boxes, that hopefully they wouldn't get caught up in that, right? If the whole idea is to be
You would hope
meeting.
so, but I know
I'm wondering, trying to imagine what that scenario is where we would somehow cancel a
Well,
committee.
I know Vanessa looked at one. I hope if I characterize it incorrectly, correct me, but they hadn't met in over 10 years. Was that?
Yeah, I was appointed to the commission.
So, and you can't really blame that on COVID. So would that be a default candidate? I don't even know what the commission is. Would that be a default candidate to put on the table saying, listen, you guys haven't met in
Yeah.
11 years. Does it really make sense to keep this commission in place, or should it be maybe reformulated or given a new birth?
That
There's
seems like a
nothing else.
default unless there's with an appeal process or something, if for some reason there's some extenuating circumstances that we
Yeah,
wouldn't.
I
be
like
aware
that
of,
idea,
but-
is that if we find those types of things, and Karen, you may have found them too when you were doing your initial research, that here's a commission that may have been, the genesis of it may have been well thought out, but the execution of it just doesn't fit for some reason, or we can't get people appointed to it. Maybe by default, we push those onto the table and say, these are going away unless somebody, the commission themselves or somebody's got to convince us that it has value and it should continue. But just to keep it in, it would be my opinion, just to keep it, because it has a neat name or whatever, but it doesn't meet, and they're not really accomplishing anything. To me, that just clogs the system of potential appointees, which we're all a source of that. Potential appointees something that's not gonna meet, or they come to a meeting room like this and they don't achieve a quorum and they have to go back home again.
Well, I would hope that in the tracking process that Deborah Childs and the staff have been working on, we'll have a spreadsheet and we'll start being able to track it much more clearly. Actually, I met with, Ann Fitzgerald and what I'd love to see is have somehow be able to work it through IT, that when these commissions and committees are meeting, it somehow could feed into a template, so somebody doesn't have to be doing all kinds of work to figure out who's met and who hasn't. I mean, that was one of the huge amount of work that HCS had to do when I was working on it. They had to they first had to figure out what all these things were, but they had to reach out to everybody and figure out when they'd met yet. The other thing, though, that you run into is that there are a couple of committees, and I can't remember the name of them, but I think one of them works on county budgets, and it has a charge, but it hadn't met for a long time, so we were thinking we'd get rid of it, based on, I mean, we always got input from the administrative agency, and I think it was HHS came in and said, yes, we haven't met for a really long time, but you got to understand this thing has a statutory responsibility that's really important. And actually this year, we're going to have to go to it and present a bunch of information. So we didn't wipe it out. It's just really, these things just have so many different iterations.
I tend to try to have a simple view of the world, and it's always catches me making mistakes along that line. But I would think if we had that mapping, we're going to have it soon. We go to committee chair X and we say, here are 15 commissions. Tell us which ones are worthwhile keeping. And if they come back and say, these 12 got to keep, these 3 over here, I think we can get rid of because they don't meet the criteria or whatever we set up. To me, that would be invaluable for us to help make decisions, for legislation to kill the commissions, or recommendations at least to kill the commission. So,
I mean, the only thing I would say is that we literally just did this work 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we just did it. So, I mean, if folks can do what they want, but we just went through this whole thing. So I don't think I think the staff doing what they're doing, if there are a few, like 2 or 3 out there lurking that they feel like that it's time, then we can do it. But what we always felt was that on the committee and committees, we weren't a substantive group. And we worked really hard not to be making decisions on substantive matters, but on the representation of the administrative agency and the chairs or members of the commission to decide whether this had a purpose to fulfill anymore. And if there was a substantive matter, then, it needed to be taken up by the standing committee.
So
I just didn't think that we should be getting involved in substantive matters.
some of the feedback I've gotten from the speaker, and also from the minority leader, is that we're out of people. We got so many people mapped into so many assignments that it doesn't make sense for us to try to set up a new commission on Z over here and populate it with a whole bunch more representatives, because their people are stretched too thin to be able to serve. I think we found some legislators were serving on over a dozen different commissions at a time, and they don't have the time to meet, and so that we're at a point of diminishing returns. We want to get some feedback, or we want to get some goodness out of that commission, but if people are too busy because they've got so many assignments and they can't attend the meetings, then
Well, that's the other thing we try to do, is reduce the number of representatives on any particular commission. We got some pushback from that, but, I mean, I don't know what you see the next task as being. Since we just did this 2 years ago, I wouldn't think that would be the first place that we would dive in. We've got September 11th is when filing period comes up again. And I feel like if we're gonna do some good work here in the next couple of months, we should be setting up what we think would be a good template for commissions and committees and have the speaker look at it and get some policies in place so that when members go marching into OLS with a whole bunch of ideas, OLS is empowered to say, have you done this? Have you done this? You've got to do this, and it's gonna stay, and we have a template worked out in advance.
Right.
I mean, I think that would be great.
Representative Wall had volunteered, now that she's not here, I can attribute more to her volunteer than maybe she wants, but she had volunteered to at least be part of, a process to determine the process, to determine what those templates ought to look like. That part of our effort ought to be looking at commissions that maybe we want to turn off. But also, part of the process ought to be developing a tight process around creating commissions and how
I
it,
think that's what we've done. And I think part of it is to start out with having Dave Alapun is here and telling us what he's got for his template now. And then have some sort of meeting of the mind. I mean, you know, with the template, all you've got to do is look at how all these commissions. But it's also got to be something that they can work fast from.
right. And I think,
To be complicated.
right, and I think
It's
what we
like a
can do,
field day.
right, some of the controls can be, we can go to the minority leader and the speaker and say, make sure that when a commission comes up, that these guys are asking the questions. Have you followed the template? Have you done X, Y, and Z in order to fulfill the needs of what a commission's gonna, and so we look to them to kind of enforce whatever rules that we put in place.
But the speaker has to empower all of us to do that. Because what happens is, you know, a member will come in and they'll say, all right, fine, in the statute here, it says 15 members, but that's okay, because I want 20. I mean, and in the end, if they win, and it can be dealt with maybe at the standing committee level, but, I mean, to me, one of the key things is, member, have you done the research to know whether or not this has been done before? And, you know, and if we have our if we have our Excel spreadsheet up to date, then it'll be so much easier for everybody to do that research. So to me, that would be a really good first step, especially because we're leading into another filing period. And the other thing is basically what shall I say, a dialogue or a Q&A for committees on all the things that they should be looking at and deciding whether to create a statutory commission or a study committee.
And Karen, do you think it would be useful that once we get this mapping done, so that we know that well, I'm just saying, if we had a mapping that said, committee, Leggy Admin, your committee, you get the committee chair and perhaps vice chair in here and say, you are empowered to oversee these commissions that are in place supporting Leggy Admin. Have a discussion with them about what we're looking for and what their responsibilities are, and for them to give us feedback as to how well the commission's doing
I
or
mean,
not
if they
doing.
know, they may not know, and that may be like next year sometime, but I think we need to make sure that the staff, whatever the Excel spreadsheet is that they're doing, that the related standing committee is listed in the column. So Brad, I don't know if you want to just carry that message. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that. I think we did that because when we were reviewing all the committees and commissions, I was calling chairs to get their input. But I mean, I think over the next few months, we should be giving OLS and our members the tools that they need to better define the process and rein it in. And then I just was gonna say one of it, it's the statutory commissions that are really a big lift. And I firmly believe that you can do, I know you had a really successful commission, but if it's a really targeted issue, you really can do some fantastic work just with legislative study committees. Of course, it all depends who chairs them. I mean, and that's why you put the infrastructure in place, and then you might have outliers. But for the most part, things should work pretty easily.
I think you're right. My most recent experience with the EDNA is that the committee chair usually has about 4 subcommittees always currently operating. And when an issue comes up that looks like it needs to be studied or looked into, she immediately assigns it to one of those 4 study committees. And then, waits a month or so for them to come back with feedback to say, okay, this is what we want to do, and we either want to support legislation or kill legislation, depending what they came up with. And it never goes to a commission.
Yeah, you do, and then that gets back to this point about trying to get standing committees to do more. Just gotta hope they will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I'm hearing is that a template for future study committees and commissions would be helpful, not just for OLS, but also for us. I mean, so there's like member education, there's OLS needs to have it to be like, did you go through the template, right? Did you go through the checklist, answer all these questions? And then committee chairs and committees also need to understand what we're expecting moving forward. And I think that can be, I think if we can recommend something to the speaker, and then I think the speaker can send it out to members, and then that's the expectation.
So do you,
moving forward.
with that thought in mind, were you envisioning that either this committee or something like this committee would be a standing committee that when a new commission was trying to give birth, they would bring it to this committee for approval, or no?
No, because I think that if there's a study committee on a particular subject, it's a substantive topic, and I think that the topic should be reviewed by the standing committee and not a bunch of people that are on more of a procedural committee.
But if part of what they're doing is making that every single standing committee is just making sure that they're doing it in the way that we've outlined, right? The recommendations that we're making. Everything from needs a sunset date, or it needs, a certain number of members, and I mean, all the things that we're talking about. So I think that's one bucket of work that we're talking about. After hearing you talk about, you weren't trying to make decisions 2 years ago or 4 years ago, whatever it was now, on which committees and commissions we'd keep and which we would get rid of. You just did it. So I think that there should also there's a template for future, and then there's a template for sort of getting committees and commissions in compliance, right? It's like report dates, like it's all the things that are in the template for new ones. It's just making sure that they're
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if they're, because a lot of them, they don't have repeal dates.
So kind of
And
a compliance check almost?
But that to me is actually, that could actually be legislation for next year, which is just let's update all of them to make sure that they have clear structure, all that. And so then when they're not, then there's a way to get rid of them.
So that raises the excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
That raises the question to me of your point about whether this committee continues to exist, or if it falls in someone else's lane for existing committees, or even going forward, new committees that then exist who fail to comply with whatever the template boundaries we set forth are. And the default should be that they end if there's an appeal process, if there's some sort of opportunity to say, wait, actually, there's a reason we should be we should be allowed to continue. Who, do they come to us? Is that alleged, admin, like? Okay, so, like, right, I don't know that how often it would happen. I mean, it seems like we would probably need some sort of standing body to take in those kind of.
But I also think it needs to be a joint committee. It should be a House and Senate committee, because if these
Okay.
are created, right, if we're creating by statute, then it's a joint, so.
Yeah, it was not even-
Because the Senate just sort of does its own thing.
It could be something that's rolled into another existing committee. I mean, it could be, I don't know if facilities is the right place, but like,
Well,
It
the
could-
proposal that we had in the bill that I put forth that was removed was that we had a joint review committee. A joint committee on committees. Now, the way I had it structured, we were gonna bring all the committees in on sort of a rotating basis, like, you know, like depending on the agency. I had it all set out. I can show you what the draft was. I don't think it's in here. But it was a joint committee and it had very clear responsibilities. And we could just have it as a standing, as that sort of a joint committee, and it would just be convened whenever it was felt it needed to be. But I have this hope that if we do our spreadsheets properly, and if we can get information fed in from IT on when they're meeting and stuff like that, or if they're fulfilling their reporting requirements, the ones that just aren't doing anything will start to rear their heads, and it would become, you know, obvious the ones that are needed, rather than having 100 commissions coming. We could figure all that out. And then the other piece is that not everything needs to be in a statute. I mean, you know, if we have a policy that's agreed on by the Senate and the House, then that would be in place.
Then what,
I think some would, but I mean, there might be
Yeah.
things that, you know, like, have you done your research and,
well, Ann Fitzgerald pointed out, you missed this part, she pointed out in somewhat of a frustrating tone that the Senate has this language of, was it 1449 notwithstanding? Was that? Yeah, 1449, which is supposed to be a governing rule, but they have this language in the Senate they use, it's 1449 notwithstanding. So in other words, we can do whatever we want, and we're not gonna follow that rule.
well, I mean, I think that's just a fact, whether it says notwithstanding or not. I mean, the members can do something other than, and it does supersede the statute. I mean, I think one of the big frustrations, and I raised this at the first meeting, is that if you have a study committee or commission bill that's initiated by a senator and is a Senate bill, then that commission should be staffed by the Senate and not always the House.
Right.
And there was an expectation, I think, for quite some time, that the House Committee Services would be the ones that staffed it. And I think that's something that has to come from the Speaker's office. I mean, I don't know if you could put that in statute, or, I mean, maybe you could, but I think it's really important, because that's part of the problem, is House Committee Services has so much to do.
Right, yes, Matt.
I think if there is a template that we decide on and that we want to move forward to the speaker, and then it's disseminated to all members, I think we should engage with the Senate about it too, and just be like, can we all come to agreement that either this or let's amend this informally? You know, I mean, we should have leaders from the Senate come join us and say, how does this sound? Like, will you testify sort of in favor or against this draft language, so that we can tweak it to get it to a spot where we're all comfortable with how we're going to expect committees and commissions to be designed and implemented moving
Yeah,
forward.
and the idea is to maximize their usefulness,
Yeah,
right?
right.
It's not just wheel spinning, it's
Yeah.
trying to get the most out of them that we possibly can for the legislative effort.
And as a kind of an asterisk, and this is something to follow up with what Matt said a couple of meetings ago, is that when we have a change in leadership in the House, we have to make sure that whatever we do is linked so that it doesn't have to start all over again.
Well, that's
or
part of the
everything.
key too. I mean, you've got to have a sustained process, but I think if you have a consensus document that comes out of a committee like this, any speaker would welcome the structure around these things. And then basically all you got to do is, which is a huge task, is figure out the appointments,
Right,
which is what's tough.
right. And as I mentioned earlier, I think so many folks are so taxed right now, they say, I can't
Yeah,
take any more
it's
appointments.
a problem. That's why if you have a committee chair in the Senate and the House, and they say if you want to proceed with the study committees, is something you'd be interested in serving on, and just see what they say.
Right.
I mean, you can.
And I was asked about it when I
Yeah.
brought a study commission forward, you know, and I thought it was really important. And that was, it was multiple times actually. I brought an amendment to turn something into a study committee, and the question was, would you be willing to serve on this? You know, and I think it's a good question.
I mean, I think it's a key question. I mean, the other thing, when I was talking about like establishing an infrastructure, because you don't know who the people are that are gonna be involved, and the other thing that there's no control for it, is that if you introduce a study committee bill, and usually the way these things work, the study committees are set up that the first named member is the sponsor of the bill, and they're the convener of the committees. And 9 times out of 10, they will end up being the chair. But you don't know that just because you thought it was a good idea to have a study committee and you're the first named member and you're the chair, that this person will know anything about how to run a study committee.
Right.
And won't, and what, you know, some people are far more organized than others, and there's just all these variables with the individual. But that's another thing, I guess, in my monologue I didn't mention. But the other thing that I know HCS has worked on is to very clearly show, if you're the head of a study committee or a commission, these are the steps that you need to take.
Right.
And you're not going to expect the committee services people to do all the work for you and run down the appointments and everything.
And I think the committee chairs can help do some screening along the lines. I have personally seen, and I won't get into too many details, but I've personally seen ideas be put forward for a commission or a committee whereby a legislator has made a commitment to a constituent that says, well, I don't know much about this. I hear what you're saying. We'll study it. And that's kind of a way to get it off his or her plate and study it and say you've met at least the initial request of the constituent. But there isn't really a real interest in that
Yeah, and
committee or
those ones
commission.
shouldn't go forward if you give X number of questions and inquiries.
So I'm just saying that this screening process that we put in place, or this template, should hopefully be able to root some of that out. Because there is some slang that one way to kill a committee or commission is to study it. Death by study or whatever. And that just, I think that just clogs the
Right. I mean, of
veins of the
course,
organization.
the other thing that happens is you have a contentious bill on a certain issue, right? And the way people sort of figure it out is to create a study committee to study it. I mean, sometimes that's valid and sometimes it's not, and all you can do is really rely on
Right,
your.
it's a prevention
standing
way to
committee.
keep it from dying. In
Right.
some cases.
But sometimes it's a valid thing. I mean, this is the challenge, to try to make sure that they're well run and we don't create too many, but also not to snuff out ones that are really useful and needed, just because we don't want to have so many study committees. But I think that from a staff standpoint, it would also be really good to have some very clear instructions on, if you're going to be running these things, how it operates and who's responsible for what. And I know they have worked on this.
Let me throw this out there, just so I can say I did it. What do you think about someone brought up a thought, that we should have a finite number of commissions. And if we're gonna add Commission C, then we gotta kill one to make room for it. And that makes room, that theoretically creates more opportunities for legislators to be on commissions because there'll be less commissions, or there may be one that they were on is now killed. What do you think about that idea?
I think it's going to pit groups of people against each other unnecessarily. And I don't think that, a study commission on solid waste going up against a study commission on future of education funding, makes. a ton
I
of
think
sense.
it's a bad idea. I think you,
Everybody think that? I just wanted to get that, because that's been suggested, so I don't, say, at least we talked about it and decided not to do it.
I mean, I wouldn't want to be the one to say that a commission that was doing really good work should be snubbed. And you're right. I mean, how do you pick between topics? What Matt just said.
And I think if the concern is not having enough legislators to sit on these committees, that should resolve itself in the sense that, like, if they can't get enough people, not enough people are willing or able to volunteer to sit on them, and they're not able to, to meet or fulfill their requirements, then it'll cease to
Yeah.
exist for whatever sunset date we put into place. It does seem like having a set number. I get the idea of trying to limit people's commitments, but
But
it
you're
feels
right. We have a
arbitrary.
5-year repeal date now
Mhm.
in, and that ought to help move.
Right, if you don't have enough people on it, or there's not enough interest,
so
that
it-
will
then
sort of
would
itself
die
out.
if it's,
So let's play that
nobody
out,
will
though.
reintroduce a bill.
Play that out. So what if the speaker, if he's responsible, or he or she is responsible for making the appointments, and can't find enough people?
Mhm.
Is it now the responsibility of the speaker's office to bring that back to the floor to say, we couldn't get enough representatives, so now there's an action here to repeal this commission, or what do you think?
Go ahead.
I think maybe we could talk about a process of how to find people, because I'm not sure we necessarily, like, that might be something that the chairs and the ranking members of the committees kind of talk about. And because I feel like my experience is there are often people out there who are looking for something new and interesting to do, but maybe wouldn't be the first people you would think of to do a particular thing. So I think maybe part of the problem is there's so much work on the speaker's office to do this work of appointing, that maybe that work should be spread a little bit beyond just the folks who are working so hard on it in the speaker's office, because they have so much else going on as well.
Yeah, Karen?
Well, I can tell you as deputy speaker, when I was the person that worked on the appointments. So just as a preliminary, yes, the timing of the appointments is really hard because you just take over the speakership or whatever, and you're dealing with, bill referrals and standing committee appointments and seating and parking, and then you have like 200 or 300 people you've got to appoint to all these committee and commissions. So what I did as a matter of course, and again, if we have our Excel spreadsheet with our committees listed, I did reach out to committee chairs and I asked for their input on minority and majority, potential appointees. And then, the other thing that you find, by the way, we can think about this, is all of these commissions, some of them say you have to have a minority appointee, some of them don't say that. Some of them say you have to have somebody from X, Y, and Z committee. Some of them are, it's a,
Community, geography.
oh my God, it's just a really confusing process. And then a lot of times the speaker isn't just responsible for legislative appointments, they're responsible for, I don't know, somebody from UNH. So it gets really confusing, but I think if we're working out a structure, again, so a lot of times, sorry to say, it just is the truth, when you have a changing of the guard, speaker to speaker, there's not great communication between the two, because it's kind of a contentious, and sometimes the policies that are put in place by one speaker don't carry over to the other one. So one of the things we could do is maybe help smooth those waters to try to get it.
What was your experience with interaction with the executive? I mean, commissions that
Oh, well,
populated
that's a
by the
whole-
governor. And
That's
so
a whole other issue. But what I was gonna say is, in many cases, what we did, well, the other thing I wanted to say is frequently, nobody will step forward and say that they want to work on a commissioner. You might have a few, and then if you have some, you might have 10 people really interested in one hot topic and nobody else. And what I honestly, what we ended up doing is that we got the input of various parties on a particular appointment, and we just send out the appointment letter. I didn't go, we couldn't like call every person, 200 people, and say, will you do this, will you do this, will you do this? We sent out the appointment letter, and if there was somebody that didn't want to do it, then we heard back from them. It's almost the only way you can do it, because if you're trying to find 250 people to fill these slots, on top of everything else you're doing in the first 2 or 3 months, it's almost an impossible task. But we can talk about the governor's office too.
It just made me think of it, something that came up maybe in our first meeting where to me, there does seem to be some benefit of like setting expectations that every legislator will be asked to sit on a committee potentially, and that would be doesn't mean everybody can do it, and there will be exceptions, I understand that, but if that's sort of the level set expectation, and then you get appointed to something, I just think that would help spread some of the responsibility. I suspect it would also build some better, ties between legislators, that everybody's sharing in some of that responsibility and understanding what that work looks like. If you come in as a new legislator, that's just, you're on a committee and you're maybe, you're on a standing substantive committee, and then you may be appointed to, or likely will be appointed to another study committee commission. I think has value.
Plus the county delegation.
Yes,
plus all
well,
the
right.
other stuff that they don't tell you.
Well, that's true. You should just get the letters on that. They just let you, they don't ask you. That's true.
You're like, what is this?
It's just so much happens within those first 2 or 3.
Yeah, yeah.
2 or 3 months. But on the governor's office, so this is, if I had a wish, if I was having to administer these things, I would try to minimize how many governor appointments there are on these commissions, because it just takes forever. And the governor's like, okay, you have to, appoint somebody from, who has a boat on a particular type of water body. It's a really difficult task, and it really affects the ability of of these commissions to work. In fact, the first committee on committees that I chaired, it was actually a creation of HB2 from the governor to create a committee to look at not only study committees and commissions, but also commissions that are established by executive order. So we had somebody from the Labor Department and a representative of the governor's office sitting on our committee on committees. And not only did we look at all the statutory commissions administered through agencies, but also all the ones that were created by executive order.
Because the question that
Which
follow-up question-
we couldn't snuff, by the way. That
Right.
had to be done by the governor's office.
Well, so one of the follow-on questions, this is for you also, Brad, is how many commissions do we have that have zero legislators on, that are only populated by executive function, by the governor's appointments?
That may be on this template. I'm not sure whether this.
Well, the question is, should we mandate that there should be at least some legislators on every commission?
That would be exactly the opposite, I think, of what we're trying to do, is to minimize legislative effort. I don't think we monitor commissions that don't have legislators on them. That's a whole other world. And we could just keep going and going, but I think that's an area that we don't even get into. And then there are several boards and commissions, they have to stay in place. They're not gonna go away, you know, depending on what their responsibilities are.
Right.
Like JALCAR, I mean, there are all kinds of things like that that we didn't even look at. But anyway, as I say, I think if we could set out, create a template that OLS and everybody would just follow, that is also shared with the legislators, if we could have like a script for committees when they're analyzing whether to approve the creation of something, I think that would be really helpful as we're going into this fall. And then to work with HCS and the Senate too. But if you are going to be in charge of a study committee, these are the things that you have to do. I think those three things would really help move the ball forward.
Representative, go ahead, Min.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, we're gonna concentrate on being proactive for future committees and commissions by setting up that template. But we're also gonna, talk about maybe putting some structure into past, the committees and commissions that have already been established, legislation for that they would have to go back and like put a sunset date on.
We can talk about that.
Okay.
I don't know what those things would be exactly, but maybe repeal or something.
And instead of like going through and redoing the work that you've already done over the past 3 years and looking at that low hanging fruit and repealing those, we're gonna kind of lean on the Excel spreadsheet that they're working on, and those things will just kind of work themselves out on their own. You're saying,
We can see if that works. If it doesn't, we might have to regroup, but I think that would be great. I just think it would be really good. What my committee on committees did was sort of look at the past and try to make recommendations, you know, fewer recommendations for the future. I think what we should really be doing in the first instance is be looking to the future to how to impose some structure on the future development of these things and try to figure out good ways of doing that. Looking at all the players like OLS, the standing committees, the speaker's office, and staff and IT.
Representative Wall.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. It was unavoidable.
I'm
Thank
gonna
you.
leave early to make up for you.
Well, I may be picking up on the wrong thread here, so cut me off if I am, please. I've been on a number of commissions and study committees and this, that, and the other. I think it's imperative that we start also at the base in our committees, having the leadership of committees, the ranking members, the chairman, vice chairman, knowing members. See, we're not meeting as much as we used to, and it's making it hard for people to know where people's strengths and weaknesses are and what their interests are. But I think it's imperative to have the leadership of the committees recommend to the Speaker's office who they want to be on these commissions and committees also. And we were always reminded years ago, when any of these bills came before us in our committees, to make sure we had details as to what the commissions were to accomplish and deadlines for things. And if we, as Claire, I'm sorry, I'm thinking Claire Evil back when, whew, sorry, as Karen suggested, look at the past to see some of what has worked and carry that forward, and then add on to what has been suggested by Representative Evil. Because in the past, I thought things went pretty smoothly, all in all, but it's been more awkward, especially since COVID, because we don't know each other. We don't know, as I said, what people's interests and strengths are. And so I think when, as we move more into in-person meetings and such, we'll have a better sense in our own committees as to how to recommend to the speaker to help the speaker's office. Thank you.
I was just going to say, one of the things, if we're creating a template for creating commissions or committees, for instance, I'll just give as an example, when we were doing our committee on committees, we found there were several statutory commissions that had stakeholder groups, but they had like 4 and 5 reps on them, you know, and to do the work, you didn't need 4 representatives, you could have 2. Now, I know in the statute now, it says something about having a majority of the membership on the commissions be representatives, and I think that's an idea to try to get people really invested in a commission before they'll create it. But from a functional standpoint, it creates a lot more work for legislators.
I think it creates numbers that we can't support.
Well, and the thing is, you just know that that particular section of it is something that any legislator is going to go in and probably override in the construction of their new commission.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again. And you're right, Karen. I also firmly believe that we should not be drawing people in from the agencies and departments. It's set for testimony and participation, but not as members of, because one of the issues we've always had is who has voting rights and who doesn't on these commissions. And it's a conflict of interest if we're working on something that affects DES, for example, for them to be promoting their own thing and voting for their own thing. That's not fair to them. Furthermore, in terms of time, these people have jobs to do, and they should be coming in when it's appropriate to offer input that the commission or committee needs. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. That's just like this whole statutory commission versus study committee thing. You're putting a huge onus on these various agencies if you have them assigned to multiple commissions, time that they don't have. So I don't know. It's a complicated subject. And you also have, when they create them by statute, you just have all these different iterations, like who's the convening body, who's responsible for staffing them, if it's an agency, if it's a corporation. I mean, it gets really complicated. And then the other issue, and I know Paul has dealt with this, is how much we carry on our website, how much of it is required to be in our calendar. If it's not in our calendar, how do we track it? It gets a little eye-crossing, but all we can do is the best we can do.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
And I also, building upon what Karen has said, it's imperative that if the legislature sets up the commission, it should be staffed by legislative people, our own employees, our own staff. That's appropriate. And it should be listed in our own calendar as our regular meetings are. I don't like this concept of possibly having commissions meet across the river or at the departments and agencies.
Right.
I think anything that's a legislative establishment should be taken care of here. Thank you.
Well, I mean, that's an idea. If we have a commission, we should require it to be calendared in our thing. And then if we work with IT, then maybe if it's in our calendar, IT can fit it into our Excel spreadsheet so that we'll know when these things are meeting. So if we're trying to assess something that hasn't been the data, I mean, I'd like to figure out a way where these things are automatically populated and it doesn't require staff to call a commission and ask them how much they've met in the last 5 years or, month or something. I think that would be really valuable.
So you think we should be able to see it as documented in the calendar, how many times they've met, for example?
Well, but to figure out a way to feed that information into some overall document that we have because so when we did it before, that's what Pam had to do. She had to call every commission and try to figure out how much they'd met, what their statutory basis was, what their membership was, who the chair was. I mean, yeah, it's just really hard to figure out. I mean, no, you wouldn't. And it took her easily 6 months. I mean, months, which is the document that's in here. And now I know Deborah's done a ton more work on it.
So let me take that as to the next step is, what do we need to do? I know we're leaving Brad with some additional tasks to finish the mapping, and another task was, I wrote it down, I just gotta figure it in my notes here. Well, we talked about creating the template for future study commissions, and Representative Wall had talked at length about that a few weeks ago. So, well, Brad, you keep working on the mapping exercise. Do we want to solicit a subcommittee of this committee to go off and start working on that template for future study commissions, and what that ought to be? Yes, Karen.
My suggestion would be that rather than reinventing the wheel, we ask Mr. Alakunis to come in and tell us what their starting document is now. And then we make sure that it covers and I'm sure he will, it'll cover what is in there statutorily, and we just look at that and see what else we would want to add to it, and then develop also the script enabling OLS to always ask the questions, like, have you done the research?
Is the 8th, which is a week from today, is that a good day for you guys? Okay, so maybe Brad, you could help us round up Alakunis to get him here in the 8th with that task as to
Would it-
what his where he is with the starting document. We had spoken to him the first day that we met, so it shouldn't be catching him cold, and that way that can be maybe the kickoff thought process, if you will, for creating the template that we want to create. Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. Yes, ma'am.
If it's sorry, Karen. If at all possible, to have it circulated to us before we meet. I understand that he'll probably want to explain it to us, and it may not be entirely clear, but I think it would be helpful for us to start thinking what we don't see or would want to see, rather than just getting it fresh, and maybe we can be more productive with it when we do get to speak with him.
Yeah, I'll certainly also pass it on to Representative Patuchek. I'm going to be in Spain next Monday, the 8th. I'll go into a family wedding, so I won't be here, but yes, we certainly can. You only get mileage here to the State House. Maybe we can start a little late, maybe that day. Yeah, so maybe we could ask Alakunis to bring that, circulate that document ahead of time to the 10 of us, and also you guys, and probably Deb, and maybe Ann would want a copy of it too. And that will help get us going. But when Alakunis comes and he prepares us with that document, I think it might not be a bad idea if a subset of us uses that as a kickoff point to do begin working on that commission, on the template, study commission template, that we can educate our fellow legislators and committee chairmen and women as to what the expectations are for commissions going forward. And so we'll think of this in the future mindset, as opposed to going back and trying to fix other things in the past, or to lay some additional work on the work that Karen did. We'll try to maybe focus on the new stuff.
Especially because we have another filing period coming up, and there's going to be a lot of these things proposed. We might as well try to do what we can
Right.
in advance. So if David, I would say we'd want to know about study committees and study commissions, if there are basic things that they include in them. And then it'd be interesting to know, what questions a drafter asks a member in trying to structure these things. you know, and then we could work from
Now,
there.
some of
It might not take that much. I mean, I don't know.
Some of the
Depends on what they do.
expectations from the speaker and from Matt, if Matt can speak for himself, but for this fall is that we would at least partially come forward with a group of legislation, proposed legislation that we could administer this in this next session coming up, in this second half of the next. Right.
Yeah. I will say, I think that is that is an option, right? I mean, I think policies is another thing. I think how it gets rolled out, how, chairs are briefed about like what the expectations are moving forward. I think all of that, I think those are recommendations that we can make. And if it is something if it is legislation, then it's legislation, but it's not necessarily.
Right. It was my hope when we started this up that I'd be able to do some sweeping activity to say, you haven't met in 4 years, you're dead. Can't do that. We have to legislate our way out of it. Right. That's what I was saying. We have to legislate our way out of it. Yes, Representative Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karen just brought up something else that made me stop and think about something else, about the drafting. We are always reminded that we should be, in recent history, to bring in as much information we can for filing legislation for the drafters. I think it would be helpful also for members to know what drafters can and can't do, because they have restrictions on guiding us, and we need to know what those are so that we can guide the legislators in the process, so that we don't have so many people bringing in very loose or almost, pardon me for saying it, almost meaningless legislation. Drafting is critical.
Right.
So I think that's good,
I
Karen.
think that's a good idea. I mean, I think if Dave is available, we could have a really good conversation with him about the drafting process up
Yeah.
front. And, some of it is sort of in the weeds for us, but I think we need to just
Right.
dive into them.
Talking to him earlier, he's a little gun shy about telling a legislator what they can and can't do.
That's why they need to be empowered.
Right, right, because he's not apt to, at least right now, with the current state of direction, he's not apt to say, you really shouldn't do that, you should do this instead. He says, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do. So we need to find a way, right, to get that direction. That's why I'm thinking of a template that he could hand back to the legislators, and this is the template that that the speaker and the minority leader came up with, or that they endorse, put it that way. So you ought to try to get your legislation to fit within these parameters. And that I think that would be helpful, because I think like I said, I think he's a little gun shy about being a clearinghouse, if you will, for legislation.
Understandably so, because they're there to support the members.
Right. Hey, John.
And Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
also building on that, what people go through, in terms of drafting and all, I think I agree with Karen that we should have Mr. Alaconis come in.
Slide up a little bit.
Scooch in just a little.
Oh,
I know I'm trying to get skinny, but not doing that.
it's okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That I don't believe drafters can say to us, oh gee, we've had 48 bills already on lollipops being allowed in the legislature or something like that. They can't tell us how many times. We can go to research to find out how many times a bill has been. So I think it'll be very helpful, as Karen suggested, to have Mr. Alaconis come in and talk with us about the processes he has the drafters and the lawyers and researchers go through, just so everyone has a clear definition of what responsibilities we all have. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'd also like to add in that conversation, just to at least start thinking about also what the approach to amendments will be like, because I think with all these retained bills that we have being brought back to the legislature, I think that amendments for study committees and commissions might be a perceived easier way out of some of these sticky situations where folks aren't necessarily able to come into agreement. So just starting to get that on the table in our conversation with Mr. Alconis will be helpful too, I think. And then one other thing is I'd like also for us to be able at that point to commit to him that those of us in the minority office and the majority office will take some responsibility to educate our caucuses on the template and on the questions that they should be asking before they go forward, especially into that sort of retained bill season.
Okay, why don't I, a great idea, why don't I suggest that in conjunction with Alakunis's pitch to us, that we think about those of us who are gonna work on this process, that we include that as part of the output as to what the expectations ought to be for the two caucuses how they should brief their members to what the expectations are. You okay with that? Yeah. John, where we are right now, I'm gonna have to leave. I have an appointment I gotta do. We're you can adjourn whatever you want, but we're going to ask Mr. Alakunis to come in and give us a pre-briefing, a handout ahead of time before next week, but also be here next week to talk about what the starting document looks like for a template for legislators, and also to look at things like, is this something that maybe Legi admin should be monitoring versus this committee? And what's the what will be? We were just mentioning for the two caucuses, what guidance should be given to the two caucuses as to what committee chairs should be telling their members about what the expectations are for commissions. Either to create the commissions or to be populating commissions. We ought to be getting ready to create a script for our chair people, and what our expectations are for legislators that are going to serve on these commissions. As an aside, good suggestion from Karen is we ought to figure out if there's a way we can limit the governor's appointments. We should treat the governor's appointments, and I'll say this if no one else will, that because he might contaminate the process.
I mean, we could say, think hard about whether to have a governor.
Right.
Nothing against the governor.
No,
just-
no. And it was just mentioned that we may need to do some amendments to commissions, and what should the guidance be for those amendments?
Yeah. Well, at the,
So with that, I'm going to step out and turn it over to you there, sir.
Before you leave,
Yeah.
you said we were gonna meet a little later next Monday, because Rep. Ebel has an
Yeah, if
executive
you're
session.
gonna, are you going to be a little bit late next Monday?
Would it be, I know 10:30 is a weird time, but I could definitely be here by
That's fine.
10:30.
10:30
10
is
would
fine.
be squeezing
I
it.
won't be here at all next week, so 10:30 good with you?
Or
well, since I'm gonna have to be the chair, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, 10:30 is fine next week. Also, what I've been doing as part of what we're trying to do is
Could wait.
the Tuesday, there's a chairs meeting of chairs and vice chairs, which is bipartisan. And I know you've been there.
I haven't been
You haven't been there? You're not, I thought you
there. There are
were.
a few Democrats.
Yeah, there are. And what I'm doing is every meeting, I step up and say, please, 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 if you're going to have committees or commissions, okay, they must have a sunset date. And whoever is the prime sponsor of that bill for that commission must be the first named member. And you'll see people starting to back off. You know that. So, but, and you know it for sure. When somebody says you got to commit to it, they're going to, oh, maybe I don't want to do this. So I've been pushing that at every chairs meeting and every bill that has come through Commerce from the Senate. when the senator is testifying, I ask them face to face, are you willing to be the first name member on this on this committee or commission? They say yes. And every bill that I've asked them to amend to put a sunset date in, they have. So if we spread the word on all our committees and commissions, say, hey, guys, we're trying to clean up the paperwork. And this is the easy way to do it. We do it proactively rather than reactively. And I've had no pushback, which is great. And it's been bipartisan. So, thank you.
Or maybe, do you think we should offer him, sort of jump in, but before you leave, should we offer both dates to Mr. Alcunis and see when he can be here? I mean, I don't want to assume he can be here on next Monday. It's not a ton of notice, but, oh, he is available next Monday. Okay, you guys are on it. Thanks. But I know you won't be here. I don't know how you feel about not being here for that.
I'm not sure if we'll be back from Spain for the fall.
Maybe he can bring, maybe if we
Yeah,
meet on
and-
Monday, the 8th, we feel it would be beneficial that he could come back. I'm not trying to overschedule his calendar, but if you come back when.
Well,
when
what I can
Chairman
do
is
is
here.
I'll communicate with, at least with you, to let you know if I'll be back a week from Monday,
Okay.
in time for the meeting.
And I know
I'll be
there's,
back, but I just don't know if I'll be back. I might be 30,000 feet in the air.
and I know a lot of us reps are on pretty good, for almost first name basis with Mr. Iaconis. So it's not a problem to communicate. So I know I am. Okay.
Well, I would,
All right. So I don't,
I'll bring pictures.
okay, I'm not sure where we stand right now, seeing as how the chair has vacated the chair. What other issues would you like to address? And
I'll just speak for myself. I mean, I think we had a good discussion this morning about what next steps should be, and I think getting Mr. Alakunis in here to talk with him about, the process for drafting study committee bills and commissions. I think that's a logical place for us to get going.
is that,
But I don't know that I feel like we've got a whole lot more to discuss here.
is that template part of going to be part of the discussion?
I think the hope is to find out what is being asked of members to include in drafting currently, so that we then have that a sort of a baseline that we can
Okay.
build from.
Okay, establish a baseline first.
Yeah, to understand what are the standard operating procedures as it stands now.
Okay.
I don't know that he has a template per se right now. I think Representative Ebel referred to it roughly as the idea he must have some sort of basic baseline that he's working from, but maybe that has to be turned into a template of sorts.
Yeah, I agree. I think their template over there is kind of fluid. And what I want to do is, for us on these is when you have a committee or commission to set up a pretty hard and fast template with the options. If you need an exception, you must justify your exception. And I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Iaconis about notwithstanding. And he said it would probably take an act of the Supreme Court to get that put into hard, notwithstanding 1449. No, he says it would probably take the Supreme Court to put their fist down on that. So we're going to have to deal with notwithstanding. Okay, is anybody else have any urgent things that we want to talk about?
Are we planning to meet at 10:30 on Monday, the 8th then for the
Yeah,
time being?
10:30 on the 8th, and then probably back to 10. See, I told Tom, Monday's my worst day. I have morning appointments, I have afternoon appointments, and I had 2 appointments this morning already. And he goes, I said, I'll be here by 11:30, and I walked in at like 11:29 and 45 seconds. And I hope you guys will excuse me for that, but, you know, and I enjoy working with you guys. I really do. It's a great team I think we got here, and we can do a lot of good stuff if everybody would just leave us alone. So we can do what we think our mission is. And, okay, and well, next Monday, 10:30, and then 2 weeks back to 10. Whether he's here or not. Okay,